Today I get the honor and privilege as always to introduce our guest speaker. Today it's Daniel Wolf, founded Cape Air in 1989 with one route between Boston and Provincetown. 8 employees and a first-year total of just 8,000 passengers. Today, Cape Air, along with sister airline Nantucket Airlines, is the largest commuter airline in the United States. Cape Air is partly an employee-owned company with a workforce of approximately 1,000, serving more than 686,000 passengers annually. Dan continues to stay current with his air transport pilot license and flies as a pilot for Cape Air. From 2011 through 2016, Dan was elected to represent Cape Cod in the islands to serve in the Massachusetts State Senate. Each term, Dan was appointed as the Senate Chair of the Committee on Labor Workforce Development, focusing on legislation around labor, workforce safety, and workplace development. Please help me in welcoming Dan Wolf.
What an honor, a pleasure, a privilege to be here with you this morning. The last 12 hours of my life is I got to pilot an airplane from St. Louis. They actually still put me in the left seat. I'm turning 60 in, what's today, the 3rd. So in 8 days, I'm turning 60. So for the next 8 days, they actually let me sit in the left seat and fly the airplane. It's kind of nice. But I got to fly from St. Louis down to Owensboro yesterday evening, just as the sun was getting ready to set. And what a spectacular flight, flying over the rural lands of Kentucky and coming into the city of Owensboro. What a pleasure. A couple of thunderheads in the distance, which I know very often are not our friends, but from a piloting standpoint, they are the most magnificent and majestic things you see in the sky. Those anvil head thunderstorms, just beautiful. And then landing here in the great city of Owensboro, went out to dinner at Miller House. That's the name of the restaurant, right? If I'm a little bit shaky today, it's just because I sampled 300 of the 500. They shut me off. I wanted to keep going, but they shut me off. What a fantastic restaurant. I've been married to a chef for 31 years. My wife is a chef, and we raised 3 daughters. And I got to tell you, I know good food. And unsolicited advertisement, Miller House, yes. And the bourbon, hey, that's an add-on. Got up, came to the hotel next door. Got up this morning before sunrise because I'm not a restful sleeper always, especially when I have to speak in front of loud crowds. It's intimidating. And I worked myself downstairs, grabbed a cup of coffee and said, gee, I wonder what's outside here, because I had my shades down in my room. And I walked out the door and saw the most beautiful sight. Now understand, I'm from Cape Cod, Massachusetts, so we have pride in the fact that that's the most beautiful place in the world. And Cape Cod is the middle of a national seashore, 44,000 acres of national park on Cape Cod, so come visit. But nothing is more beautiful than the sight I saw when I walked out the back door of the hotel next door this morning, which was the beautiful Ohio River. And I had the privilege of walking up and down. And in fact, at one point, this huge fish jumped. And my instinct was to run back to the hotel room to grab my fishing gear. And then I realized I didn't bring my fishing gear. Next time I will. What kind of fish would that have been? But it was big, right? That's a big fish. It was a shark. We actually have great white sharks now around Cape Cod, you might have heard. And then as I turned around, I walked down that way, and as I turned around, the sun was just coming up over the Ohio River behind the bridge. And as I walked down further, I saw the citizens of Owensboro doing their laps around the front of that, and I said, this is a really blessed privilege to be here. One of the things that privileges I get going out and speaking on behalf of Cape Air is I fall in love with so many of the communities I get to visit. And it's so interesting because when I come into a community, I hear some of the background noise of what's wrong and what we got to fix and what elected official isn't doing what they should or what business is overstepping what it should be doing. And when you look at this place from a distance, like I was able to do the last 12 hours, I hope you all are as proud and appreciative of where you live as I am to run a business here and as I am to be here this morning. And I promised, because I am from Massachusetts, not to get deep into politics this morning. But I do just want to say one thing, and it's relative to the prayer that we all did this morning. And the theme of that prayer was togetherness. And one of the things that really irritates me as a business leader and as a former state senator is the talking heads and sort of the environment we live in is about divisiveness. What you would hear in this part of the country is you're at war with the East Coast and the West Coast, and you're defending the heartland. And that is such rubbish. There are so many areas in which together is the theme. We all as business leaders get up every morning trying to build stronger communities, trying to make a living for our children, trying to build a future for the economy and for the places that we live, the places that we love. That's what we all do. And that brings us all together. And everything else is under that. And our political system is supposed to be serving that, not driving wedges of division. So what I would say is no ideology, no political labels. We all are here to serve that mission. And I'm really proud of that. So that bridge out there, extend it to Hyannis, Massachusetts, and consider us all in this together. From the heart, before I speak a little bit about aviation, because I will eventually get to that. I was told I have an hour, is that right? I want to introduce my co-owners and colleagues from Cape Air who are here this morning. Would you guys stand up, please? Where did Andrew go? Oh, so Andrew is in the back. He is our Senior VP of Planning. Don is our Regional Chief Pilot. Rich is our Station Manager, and Matt is our Regional Director. I'm really proud that you guys are here today, and I think you represent our company really well in this region, so I want to thank you for that. The other thing that I was thinking as I was walking this morning is what a great example I was walking on of how public-private partnerships can work. I did a little bit of homework about the region here, and I was intrigued to see, the old joke about, well, the wagon wheel guy went out of business because they weren't innovative and didn't keep up with technology. You've heard that saying, nobody makes wagon wheels, or, we got to stay up on technology. The fact is this community had one of the premier wagon manufacturers in the country in the late 1800s, and then that transitioned into an automobile manufacturer, which then transitioned into making chassis for Model T Fords, which I think is really cool because it shows that this community can just keep up with the times as they change. The place is known for bourbon, but it goes so far beyond that, and it's really a very neat place. The other thing that I found out when I did the research was about your Owensboro municipal utility. And one of the things that I worked hard on when I was in the Senate was how do we actually affect our utility production and distribution in my district in Cape Cod, because we've had some failures, so that we can have more public ownership and public involvement in electricity, water, which is one of our big issues, and high-speed internet. And I come to find out as I come to Owensboro that since 1895, you've had a publicly owned utility that is addressing all of those issues that I'm working so hard in Massachusetts to try to increase and improve public engagement. So I know that's a controversial issue because it always is. When you have a publicly owned utility, people always think, that again is sort of government doing something it shouldn't be doing. But I will tell you, the grass is always greener, because when I come here and see the development that's going on and know that underneath every development, underneath every success story, like the success story on Main Street here or the waterfront here, there has to be infrastructure, there has to be support from utilities, and there has to be real public-private partnership and engagement. Clearly, you've tackled that here, and I hope, again, as much as you appreciate the sunrise over the beautiful Ohio, you also appreciate that, because I think it's important. The other thing is I feel at home because 18 years ago on the Cape, I was one of the founders of our Economic Development Council, so I understand the good work that the EDC is doing here. And I also serve on the board of the largest regional bank in southeastern Massachusetts. So we were up here trying to pay attention because we were so intent on solving all the banking issues in the world. So that's been a lot of fun. A little bit about aviation and airlines. We've served here in Owensboro for a number of years. We provide service to the great city of St. Louis. St. Louis has over 200 flights a day from that airport. I think 60 or 70 different destinations. Your largest carrier there is Southwest Airlines. Anybody here flown Southwest Airlines? Anybody here flown Cape Air? Please raise. Are you kidding? Wow, that is very cool. So that, clearly there is a connectivity between here and St. Louis that opens the world, that does create that connectivity into the national air transportation system. In 1978, when the airlines were deregulated, coincidentally, that was the year after I learned to fly. So I've been flying for 40 years this year. And about that long, the airlines have been deregulated. There have been many cycles since deregulation where small community air service is at peril. And we know, those of you who raised your hands obviously know, how important that connectivity is into the national air transportation system. Some of you may not know, as part of the deregulation in 1978, certain communities through what is called the Essential Air Service Program are guaranteed continued uninterrupted air transportation service. It was the deal that the government made with small communities who had air service. If you in Congress will vote in favor of deregulating the industry, we in Congress will vote in favor of a subsidy program that will continue uninterrupted air service to your small communities. So the reason that air service exists here in Owensboro right now, I would say, is because of that Essential Air Service program, and we're proud to be a part of that. The neat thing about that program is you get to decide what the service looks like and where it goes to. And Cape Air, we're in the middle of, I think, a year and a half into a 4-year contract, or around 2 years in, so about halfway through our 4-year contract, providing service to St. Louis. As that contract comes to an end, I would encourage all of you to have a rich dialogue about whether you continue with Cape Air and St. Louis, whether you ask Cape Air to go to another city, whether you look at other airlines to come in, because that's really your decision to make. And it's one of those areas where competition is healthy. Because when you get together as a community and say, let's really look at the air service we're getting out of Owensboro and whether it serves the community needs, the business need, the travelers' needs, you get to be part of that. So I would encourage you to be part of that process. Any form of transportation is key to economic development and the health of a community. And we know that because if you look at a map of the cities that developed in the United States, what was the first method of transportation before there was anything? It was the natural transportation provided by waterways. So if you look at a lot of the early cities in this country, Owensboro being one, you had access to navigable waterways, and that transportation link is what allowed the city to develop. Then the trains started, and you saw a lot of cities build up around where the railway system went. And after World War II, when we invested in our interstate system, and I know you all here are working on getting a spur, I think from Route 65 to connect, that's key and it's vital. But one of the transportation modes that is very often overlooked is air transportation and the investments that we make together as a community, the public investment we make in our airports and in our air transportation infrastructure. And it's so important because, as I like to say, if you build a mile of road, you can go a mile. But if you build a mile of runway, you can go anywhere. And it's so important to remember that because actually the investment in transportation, air transportation infrastructure is relatively cheap when you consider the investments to create that kind of connectivity in other modes of transportation. So as Wade said, Cape Air was started in 1988, 89. There were a handful of us. It was born from a passion for aviation. I was one of those kids at the airport fence that held onto the fence with my face stuck up to it, looking at every airplane coming and going. Or if I went to the beach, I'd look up at the birds and say, how do they do that? And as I got into college and had the flexibility to learn how to fly, on Cape Cod, I would bus tables at night. I would get up the next morning with the money I made, run to the airport, and spend it on learning how to fly. Back then, to take a flying lesson in a Cessna 152 was $22 an hour, including the instructor. So you actually could bootstrap yourself into a pilot's license back then. Very challenging to try to do that now just because the economy and the economics of air transportation have changed. But learning to do that 40 years ago, and then about 10 years after that, a group of us got together and started the airline in Cape Cod, and it was clearly just from a passion of loving to fly. I flew that first flight, and I was so excited in 1989. And we have shared that passion for the last 28 years with our customers. We've built the company. As Wade said, we have over 1,000 employees now. We serve over 40 destinations. And it still is a company which is born of passion of flight, right? I'm looking at our chief pilot, and certainly he gets it. There's never a flight I've done in the 40 years that I haven't felt blessed to be able to sit in a heavier than air machine and actually go down the runway and pilot that thing into the air. About 100 billion people have lived in modern history. 6 billion of us inhabit the planet now. That means 94 billion have been with us and passed on. But of that 100 billion people, how many have ever had that privilege? Let alone riding in an airplane, but being able to pilot one. And we still carry that passion into what we do each and every day at our airline. 3 of the fundamental building blocks of an airline, for those of you who are sitting, wow, that looks like an easy business. I think I'll go start an airline. It looks like so much fun. The 3 things you need to start an airline. What's 1? You need a plane. What's 2? You need someone to fly it. And what's 3? You need airports, yes. That's the public sector of it. You need capital, yes, very capital intensive, but you also need mechanics. Because as anybody will tell you who flies airplanes, the real backbone to an airline is who fixes them. Because when you get in the airplane, you got to kind of have a good piece of equipment to fly. And after I got out of college, I spent 2 years at a technical school, so I'm also a licensed airframe and power plant mechanic. So I sort of understand that side of the business too. We find ourselves here in 2017 with a critical shortage of pilots. And the reason for that is, nationally, it has happened organically. That after World War II, in the mid and late 1940s, all of the World War II pilots who were in their 20s probably then, looked to transition from military flyers into civil aviation. And that provided us in the industry a supply of pilots for the next 30 to 35 years. And after the Vietnam War, the same thing happened. A lot of the military pilots transitioned into civil aviation. And the industry sort of took that for granted because we just had a constant supply of pilots. Well, what's happening in the industry now is that the Vietnam era pilots are retiring. The World War II have long retired. The military is no longer minting pilots for civil aviation, and we are out of pilots. And then along comes, and I'll actually say something politically that you will like here. Along comes Chuck Schumer from New York, who passes about the dumbest law you could imagine relative to pilot certification. And that is the double whammy, because not only is the market getting tight, but then intended consequences of making the airline industry safer in a bill filed by Chuck Schumer 5 or 6 years ago actually had the opposite effect and put pilot requirements into the cockpit of our airplanes that are almost unmeetable. So we have a crisis now relative to the number of pilots, and you're seeing airlines cancel flights, park airplanes. You're seeing communities lose service because of the lack of pilots. Cape Air, 10 years ago, started a program in partnership with JetBlue, which we call the Gateway Program. It was the first in the industry. And we are proactively recruiting from training schools around the country now, Embry-Riddle and University of North Dakota, some of the bigger training schools. And we admit student pilots in their sophomore year of college. They then graduate, come to Cape Air for 2 years, and then go to JetBlue. So we have been very proactive as a private business in trying to tackle the shortage of pilots. But we're flying into a real headwind. And even a company like ours, right now we're about 40 pilots short. So if any of you are pilots and want to come fly for the best little airline in the country, come speak to me afterwards. On the mechanic end, there's also a critical shortage of technicians. And Cape Air 3 years ago, in conjunction with our community college, Cape Cod Community College, actually put together and started an aviation technician school. It's a 14-month program. My daughter's fiance is actually in that program. He's going to be a mechanic, I hope, for Cape Air. I'm trying to get him there. But we started an airframe and power plant associate degree program with our community college. We donated one of our airplanes to the college. We now have 93 airplanes, so we almost didn't miss it when we donated it, and a bunch of tooling. And we have been proactive in trying to be ahead of the shortage of technicians in the industry. But that also is a real ball and chain around growth and small community air service. The third thing is no one would build a good replacement airplane for us. So we went out to Wichita and we begged Cessna, we talked to the folks at Piper, we talked to every U.S. manufacturer. I think it's an embarrassment, and again, it's a sign of what I would call failure, and I would say it's a policy issue, because there are product liability issues involved. There's a lot of regulatory reasons why they stopped building the type of airplane that Cape Air uses in the mid-1980s in this country. So we actually had to finally engage a manufacturer just outside of Naples, Italy. By the way, if you want a good business trip, look for a partner around Naples, Italy, because it's a great excuse to go to another beautiful part of the world. But we had to actually engage a development partner to build us an airplane in Naples, Italy. We've been 6 years in development. The airplane's going to be off the assembly line by the end of 2018, and hopefully you'll see that aircraft here in Owensboro. The good news is the engines are made in Pennsylvania. Garmin, which is a U.S. company, is making the avionics. Most of this stuff is actually made here. Then it's shipped over to Italy. They assemble the airplane, and then we have to figure out how to get it back here. Does that make any sense? Not really. But we have proactively been looking for ways to address that issue too, because we don't think the type of flying we do, and Cape Air does around 140,000 flights a year. Think about that, 140,000 takeoffs, and actually 140,000 landings too. They have to match each other in this industry. When you do that type of flying, that frequency of flying, we believe, obviously our priority as any airline is safety, and we believe that the airplanes we do it in should have 2 engines. So what you're seeing in some of the small communities is a replacement of the twin engine airplane, which we operate, with airplanes that only have 1 engine. And flying around at night in marginal weather, we do a lot of flying over the water in some of our other regions. My opinion is, as a pilot and a mechanic for 40 years, that you want 2 engines. And that's why we have done a worldwide search and really been in development for the perfect replacement airplane. We're big enough so that we're able to make a 100 airplane order, which actually is interesting to the manufacturers. About $2 million a piece, so it's a $200 million opportunity for the bankers in the room, and I think a good one. So that's the state of the industry. It is absolutely economic development for anybody that's lucky enough to have scheduled air service. I think very often it's not thought of. It was heartwarming when I asked, how many people have flown Cape Air, to see the number of hands go up, because clearly the people in this room understand that it's not only access for you to go on important business trips or family vacations or to get out to see the rest of the world, but even more importantly, it is an invitation and an open door for the rest of the world to come here and see you. And now, after the last 14 hours I've spent here, you have somebody who's going to go as far away as Naples, Italy, promoting Owensboro, Kentucky. So you better keep that door open, otherwise people won't be able to get here. More and more people will be coming to this great destination. So that's sort of the state of the industry. We have some real challenges, but those who are entrepreneurs in the room, that's what we like. We like those challenges. Who here started their own business? And just out of curiosity, who here works for a business with less than 50 employees? Okay. When I talk about building a bridge and when I talk about public-private partnership, the big guys can take care of themselves, right? We know that. Where we need to look for public-private partnership is, how do we support small businesses? How do we allow for entrepreneurship? Whether it's in the airline world, the restaurant world, the retail world, anywhere in the hospitality industry, those are the bridges that I think we need to build, without regard to ideology, without regard to labels, because that is how we build a future that we all benefit from. And for my 3 daughters, who are 30, 27, and 24, we owe it to them. People looked at me and said, Dan, you had the best job in the world. You work at the best company in the world. Why would you step out at 53 years old and get into the Massachusetts State Senate? Why would you do that? And the answer is because I think those of us who can leave the biggest footprint we can, for those of us who are going to walk in those footprints going forward, have a responsibility and an obligation to try to do that. And I found myself at a point in life where I could actually do that, because I was after the Vietnam War. I never actually served in the military. I am somebody who now believes in the Israeli model. I think everybody who graduates from high school should do at least a year of public service, whether it's AmeriCorps or whether it's the service. And I hadn't done that. And so I stepped into politics to really try to turn around some of the trends that we've seen. And again, without party affiliation or ideology, because it isn't about that. It's about really seeing a clear vision and a path for the future and getting to it. I made a pledge with myself never to make a speech as a business person and sort of as a ex-former politician without addressing the issue that is first and foremost in this country right now relative to small business, and that is healthcare. So in case you need to be woken up with something controversial, I'm going to just talk for a second about healthcare as it relates to our business and as it relates to the overall society we live in, but more important for this morning, our economy and economic development. I have said for years that it makes no sense whatsoever to put on the back of the businesses in this room, especially those with less than 50 employees, who don't have the ability to hire HR experts to figure out the Rubik's Cube of how you're going to provide health care for your employees. So I stand in front of you without saying whose obligation it is. I will tell you that the groups I speak to who represent businesses, if you ask them, what would the biggest thing you could do to help my business, economic development, it would be to decouple the responsibility of healthcare from employment. And if I split the room and said, those who think therefore that it shouldn't be anybody's obligation, step over there, some people would step over there, let the market decide. And if I said, if we remove it from the responsibility of employment, where you get health care, maybe somebody else should do it, like local government, state government, federal government, some of you would step over to that side. But there is almost universal agreement that in this day and age, it is nonsensical to be coupling healthcare with employment. The workforce is too transitory, the complexity of it is too complex, and the actual provision of healthcare to our citizens is too erratic. And in closing on this issue, I'll just say the following. My youngest daughter is 24, so she is still on my health plan. She is extremely healthy. My wife and I are relatively healthy. Our premium this year, $27,000 to insure 3 of us. Now I know our rates are higher in Massachusetts because there are more mandates in Massachusetts. That doesn't work. My middle daughter, who is no longer on our health plan, and she is a self-employed person, she's a yoga instructor and she's studying to be a social worker and doing all those things that will make her no money in her life. She has had to switch health plans 7 times in the last 2 years because she's honest, and every time her income changes, she calls Mass Health, and if people from Massachusetts want to declare that we've actually solved this, don't believe them. It is a mess in Massachusetts. And we were, 6 years ahead of the national plan. She's had to switch plans 7 times in the last 2 years, and she's lost her primary care physician twice in those transitions. It isn't working. So I would really like a rallying cry without regard to ideology. This is a practical discussion. Could we have a real discussion about how we actually decouple healthcare from where people go to work? It made sense when we coupled it a couple of generations ago. There are a lot of good reasons historically, but this is crazy. What we have done is forced everybody into a broken system. We haven't actually fixed the system. And so I would just say, non-aviation related, that's my only plea to the business community here, is take a good look at that. You got a lot of stakeholders here. Your biggest employer in the region is your healthcare employer, as it is on Cape Cod. Cape Cod Healthcare that employs about 4,000 people. So I get the kind of dialogue we have to have. And you have insurance providers here as well. I get that too. But we got to have that discussion. I'm going to be hanging out afterwards. If you have any desires, like, I know people will come up and say, why doesn't Cape Air get 737s and fly to Chicago? Prepared to answer those questions and have any kind of dialogue. But let me just close where I started. I love this place. I'm falling in love with the people here the more I get to know. You all are really fortunate. I hope you're as proud as what you have as I am to be serving this community through Cape Air. Thank you very much.